refixing top ribs, it's no good trying to do a patch-up job. If a top rib leaks, let's find a gun and show what I mean. If a top rib leaks, it's no good trying to patch it, fill in where it leaks, because usually by the time the ribs are loose, there's so much oil and muck underneath them that you've got to do a good job. You've got to strip off all the ribs and do a complete rib refix, and of course they'll need bluing. But if you do a rib refix and then stick it in a hot blue tank, your ribs will come off again. You know? But if there's one was leaking, say about here, you try to patch it, it wouldn't work. Your solder wouldn't take anyway. So you've got to strip off all the lot and refix them. And it's a big job, because you've got to take off the ribs, and then you've got to clean out all the old solder underneath and off the side of the ribs too, because where it touches against the barrels, clean out all the old solder off. You've got to re-tin, in other words, put a coat of solder on, a thin coat of solder on the inside, the surfaces where the rib fits, in between the barrels there, and also tin the rib as well. Then you've got to wire them up and hold them down. Now, with wiring up, you use some wire, a bit thicker than this, same kind of wire, iron wire. But you need, it's a skilled job. I don't mess with it. I send it out to somebody else. I mean, the time it takes me to do one, I might as well send it down to Kirk Merrington. They can do it cheaper than me. You need to make some little wedges up about out of 1/8 of an inch flat aluminium, kind of something like that, only a bit smaller of course, to push under the wires to hold the rib in place, you see. But I don't mess, I send them out. It's not worth it, you see, that is the essential thing with this trade. If you're going to be doing gun repairs, if you can send them to a specialist who specialises in that, you might as well, because it's cheaper in the long run. And and if you spend all day doing one, and you're probably going to charge the customer more than if you sent it to the specialist and he did it, you see. So, and again, barrel making or barrel filing, whatever you want to call it, is a section on its own. You know, he's right there, isn't he? I can see Len's been teaching you all. These are steel, aren't they?
Yes.
The only reason I said aluminium, because if you go slap up it with the solder, you can have these soldered to the bloody rib. And alloy won't solder, you see, to the ribs. But now, it's a pain in the arse of a job, and really, you need some. You really need some parallels to put them on, and you need to make up a set of called parallels. I don't know what it's got in here, but they're, you've got a piece of square metal there, and a piece of square metal there, and a square rod in between, big square rod in between. These two surfaces are parallel to each other, that way and lengthwise. The whole thing is square, all these are square, every surface is square to each other. And this part here you hold in the vise. You rest your barrels on top of here. You see there's a lump sticking up. You rest your barrels on top of there. You can also see if a pair of barrels is, when you're setting up a pair of barrels to braze the lump, you can set them up on there. If they rock on a set of parallels, they rock like that. You've got one higher than the other. Right? It's just, and it's a useful tool for resting your barrels on for your soldering, because you can work along there with your torch and your solder, you see. The other way of doing it was not to use a torch, but to use plugs. And a good barrel filer could have long rods about so, or longer than a set of barrels, and have a plug on the end about half-inch square or something like that. And they have this long rod going back, you see. And he'd heat these up in a furnace or his hearth, get them red hot, 4 of them, and he'd shove 2 in the muzzle end, 2 in the back end. The 2 that went in from the muzzle end, he'd shove them right up there, and the other ones in the breech end were just right in the end, because this part being thicker would take more heat to heat up quickly. Once he got his solder running here, he'd start moving these rods back and the other rods up the barrel, and the barrels would get discoloured through the heat a bit, but it didn't matter, because by the time he got to the end, he'd working his solder, turning them over, doing the top rib. He got all his solder run and everything, and the plugs had cooled down. He could just take them out. So with that method, you've got to be quick. You've got to move your plugs quick. And it took a real skilled man to do it. Go with lots of practice. Using a torch like that, you can work along much easier. You won't get them too hot, you see. But basically, those are two methods I know of doing refixing ribs. And if you do decide to have a go at it, don't use rusting flux. You can use a corrosive flux for tinning, but when it comes to final fitting of your ribs, use a non-rusting flux. Something that you can use rosin. Rosin's about the best. You can powder it up and sprinkle it down as you go along. Rosin's a good flux for that, and it's non-rusting. So if any goes down between the barrels, you've got no fear of it rusting. Now, there's another thing you'll find. Some of the very old guns, you take the ribs off, they're rusted to hell underneath between the barrels. They're rusted and pitted where the rust got in, eaten away. Because in the old days, very old days, years ago, the barrel filers, the cheaper guys, the guys that were working for peanuts, doing cheap barrels, would use a rusting flux called salammoniac. And it came in bars. It was in like a big white bar of soap, and it gave off fumes. It killed the poor buggers eventually, but they used to work with this salammoniac, and ones that were done with salammoniac, they tend to rust underneath, and you'll get some there. There's nothing to solder to. It's just one mass of pitting and just a little bit of clear metal here and there. So it's very difficult to refix some of them old ones, you see. But again, as I say, you'll only see that in some of the old cheap hammer guns that were made in Birmingham.